Good afternoon. The April 21st, 2015 session of the Oklahoma City Water Utility Trust will be in order. The first item on the calendar is the minutes from the April 7th meeting.
Move the minutes.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Are there questions or comments? Hearing none, voting please. Minutes are approved. Next item is the consent docket.
Move approval subject to individual consideration.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the consent docket. Are there matters to be discussed separately? Here, you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just point out that we're getting ready to bid two pump station expansions in southwest Oklahoma City on Reno Road in the 115 block and the 76 block that will help put the permanent pumps in where we've had some temporary pumps for a few years through the summer. Very excited to be getting those final improvements in the Southwest Water System improvements bid and in construction.
Any other comments? Voting please. Consent docket's approved. Next item. Is the concurrence docket. Four items.
Move approval subject to individual consideration.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the concurrence docket. Are there matters there to be considered separately?
I just note that we usually worry about removing obstacles from water projects, and in this one instance we're installing obstacles, so I just thought that was interesting.
Other comments? Hearing none, voting please. Concurrence docket is approved. Next item is emergency construction contract, which was
since we only have three.
And we only have three.
I'd move that we defer that until the next meeting.
Is this
second?
What kind of an emergency is this that we can just keep pushing off?
Well, the work's being done. We just haven't ratified it.
I have this concern about emergencies.
Yes, sir. In this case, I did personally declare the emergency as I'm authorized to safety. We had a large leak on a 72-inch water main. We did proceed with the repair as is commonly our practice, not because we take approval of emergencies lightly, but because the leak had the potential to be doing significant damage.
I recognize it. This is a ratification of a declaration of emergency for something that's already happened.
Yes, sir.
I just couldn't resist talking about an emergency. It's just something.
Well, this does fall under your life safety criteria. It falls under the life safety criteria, though, too.
Right. Anyway, we will continue that till the next meeting, May 5th.
May 5th, okay.
Item 6 on the agenda is the approval of the fiscal year 2016 loan agreement with the McGee Creek Authority in the amount of $2,647,235.
Move approval.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the loan. Is that amount the annual loan, or is that the total amount of debt that the authority owes Aqua?
Mr. Chairman and trustees, this is the annual amount that it takes to fund McGee Creek, less the amount Aqua funds and the revenues received from the Rural Water District in Atoka County.
Is this
for 1 year?
This added to a?
Yes.
Do we know how much the debt is now?
It's in the document. It's 50.
I'm not
48 million.
I'm just.
It's 50-some million.
I have
40. It was 48.9 part of this amount.
Through end of fiscal 2014.
Yes.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to approve the loan agreement. Further comments? Hearing none, voting please. Loan agreement's approved. Next item, presentation by staff on emergency power generation services. and a report on the same.
Mr. Chairman and trustees, I want to introduce you to Dustin Seagraves. He is our new water quality superintendent, replacing the retired Monty Hannon. Dustin's going to tell us today about a couple of options that we have for emergency power while we prosecute the work to complete the grant project to install permanent generators at the Draper Water Treatment Plant.
Yeah, Chairman and trustees, thank you. I appreciate this opportunity to give you this report. What I have here is the Draper Water Treatment Plant is located on the southwest location of Lake Stanley Draper. The Lake Stanley Draper Water Treatment Plant is becoming one of the most important water facilities in the city, and it supplies approximately 2/3 of the city's population. Currently what we have is the existing power feed from OG&E is fed by two substations, one from the north and one from the south, so we actually have two separate feeds coming into the system currently feeding the plant. What we've noticed is in the history over the last, 8 years, over the last 8 years, a total of 61 drops or surges has occurred with that time, and these ranged anywhere between a few minutes and even up to 8 hours. And so the loss of reliability service has decreased over the years through that. And every time we lose power over a Draper, of course, the water supply decreases and the pressure decreases in those areas, those service areas. What this has led to is we're all excited about the FEMA grant application that we received for the $24 million generator program and for the electrical distribution system at the Draper Water Treatment Plant, and we're excited about this project, and it is anticipated to be completed in December 2017. And so with that, what that leads us to believe is what do we do in the next 2 years? What are our options in the next 2 years until this power generation system comes available and comes online?
Dustin, what kind of generators are we putting on site?
What we're doing is they're natural gas and diesel fueled because of the regulations, and Sam, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because of the regulations of the exhaust. We're leaning towards the diesel generators because currently the regulations of the biofueled diesel and natural gas generators, the Tier 2 and Tier 4 requirements, they haven't quite got set, so we're leaning towards the diesel generators.
Okay, I would have assumed that the emissions would have been less with gas and natural gas generator. I mean, and that's fine. I just knew that there are issues in some communities using diesel backup generation because of the air emissions, and I didn't know if we'd had to deal with that or not. So.
No, then that was the thing is with the natural gas generators, with the requirements and everything, and the FEMA grant money, it was able to. They're still the biofuel,
right,
but they're going to be mainly ran off of diesel with the option in the future because of the transmission to be able to run off.
Right.
The different situations, different gases, that it was hard for the competitive bidding and everything to be able to have the manufacturer supply that technology since it's newer.
Sure.
So what we have is currently in place, just so you're aware of it, currently we have in place an existing Agreco contract that supplies our backup generation equipment. We have that in place, and what I've done is I went through and I said if I have to call Agreco out for 7 days operation, for 24-hour operation, it's going to cost $900,000 for this emergency backup power for that. And that cost has only occurred when we activate it. And what it is, and this power is only for one treatment train of the plant, and there's currently 3 treatment trains, so that's approximately 50 MGD of water that we will still be supplying to the customers. The advantages of this is we still keep the ability to supply water. It's a full service contract. The city is not required to do anything. There's no overhead expenses, and we only pay when in use. However, the disadvantage is the equipment is not guaranteed, meaning since it's a rental company, if there's another event or if an event takes place, if other people get the equipment before us, then it's first come, first served. And also it's a possible 1 to 2 activation just to be able to mobilize and get the equipment on site. And also just with the significant cost that it would cost the city to be able to activate this if needs be. And so with this current contract in place is we have an option to go if we need to go down that road, but we wanted to see what we could do to be able to reduce costs and have different options available to be able to work this out. So what we did is we met with the Greco and discussed with them, and they performed a scoping study report. With that scoping study, they visited 20 sites, including the Draper and Hefner Water Treatment Plant and also all the booster stations in the city. And they did an analysis of the system to see exactly what types of power, equipment, and everything that they needed. And the recommendations that they come up with to be able to help reduce the cost is to have an on-site storage of the equipment, meaning that we would rent the equipment, have it in place on the site at Draper or Hefner, and what that does is it alleviates a 1 to 2 days activation to 4 to 8 hours activation. So when I call them to be able to activate it, they would come out, hook up the generators, and we'd be back serving water in 4 to 8 hours. And also the reduced cost, is since we're actually renting the equipment on a longer-term basis, then the rental cost has actually come down. However, it's only for a 4-month coverage fee because, we picked the best, we picked 4 months to get us through the stormy season, whether that be in the spring or in the summer, or in the winter, I'm sorry. The cost breakdown on this next slide, it kind of shows you the rental cost, the freight and everything, the fuel cost. And so for 4 months of service, if we have to run it for 1 week, again, this is a 1 week for 24 hours, it would cost approximately a little over $500,000 to be able to run this equipment. And again, this is still 24 hours, 7 days a week, and only the power for one treatment train. So you're still supplying the same amount of water for that. So what that does is some of the advantages of this is the equipment is on site. We're guaranteed to have it. It's a 4 to 8 hour activation time, so that way we can get up and operational more heavily and more reliable. And also, we're not relying on overhead power lines because most likely in a storm event, power lines may or may not be there. And so with the generators on site, to be able to hook it up, we don't have to rely upon those. So of course, the disadvantage is it's like an insurance policy. Is if we don't use it, is we're still paying approximately $300,000 for 4 months of coverage. And if we want to have coverage in the winter season for an ice storm or anything like that, then it would be double that, so almost $600,000 to be fully covered in the case of a storm event, even if we don't use it. So,
Can I interrupt you a second right there?
Yes, sir.
How many, what are the statistics show about interruptions during the winter as opposed to spring storm interruptions?
What it is looking through the data. I had to look through the data, but from my recollection, the more it happens during the spring and summertime, because of the low demand on OG&E and the winds to be able to intermittent, and because the last few years the stormy season has been better because the winters haven't been as bad as a summer or springtime. But I don't know exactly off the top of my head.
But the cost of coverage in the wintertime would be the same?
Correct, sir. It'd be the exact same, because what we're paying for is the ability to have the equipment on site for that 4 months, and then if we ever had to activate it, then you would add the fuel cost, and then the rental rate actually decreases, but you had the fuel cost and then the maintenance and service on that as well. Because during the time of operations that it's running, as a Greco will come out and service it and maintain it and be able to keep it full of fuel and everything, and so the city staff does not have to worry about it operating.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so with option 2, what we did is we looked with Oklahoma Electric Co-op, and we met with them to see if they actually have the infrastructure and ability to be able to supply us with backup power. And they actually do. They have their facilities, and they have the ability to supply us with the backup power as required for the same one treatment train of electricity costs. However, what we require is an agreement with OG&E, because the service that OG&E services, the Draper Water Plant, is included in their service area. OEC has to have an agreement to have OG&E allow them to serve us backup power. And this would be strictly backup power only for that. And so with their current services, what they have is OEC actually has 2 substations to be able to supply us power, so they actually have two different sources of power. So again, we have that redundancy and that reliance to be able to get power from 2 different sources. And then also the existing transmission lines are sized properly to be able to get us the power that's required. There is some infrastructure that we would have to pay for upfront costs, and that's approximately about a $100,000 investment. And what that is to be able to lay overhead power 3,100 feet from southeast 149th Street from their main transmission lines up to the plant area. And so that would be an investment that we would have to incur to be able to get this power to us. So that's a small investment that would be on our part. So the cost breakdown for this is with the upfront capital investment and the power guarantee, because there's a fee that OEC would say that at any time that in their system they would reserve us the allocated power that we needed, and then once we turned on the system, the power consumption, again, this is the same 24 hours a day operation for 1 week, and then you have a peaking charge. Just like with OG&E, is during this time, as I put, worst case scenario is that if there are certain months in the year that if you run the electricity at the peaking hours, then you're automatically charged that fee the rest of the year, the rest of the calendar year. So that's what that $18,000 covered. So with all the fees included and everything, it's still about the same as the Aggreko revised pricing contract. It's still it's about $100,000 less if you take out the capital investment for running. The advantage of this is you actually have full year coverage. You have 365-day, 24-hour service. It's a separate source from OG&E, so if something happens that with OG&E, their substations or anything, that we have an opportunity to be able to keep the plant online. And it's also affordable. It's a lot less affordable to be able to run, just to maintain it. And also, if you're not running the system, then it actually costs less than the contract, with the Aggreko contract. But again, the disadvantages, of course, is we're relying upon the overhead power lines. It's a good thing if the overhead power lines are there, but if a tornado comes through, it's a 50-50 chance that the power lines may or may not be there to be able to operate this. So, in summary, I just want to, if there's no event, if we just actually, leave the equipment, the rental agreement is a revised Aggreko contract for 4 months coverage, is about $280,000. That's just having the equipment on site just in case something happens. An insurance policy, you might want to think of it that way. And OEC pricing is $86,000. That's just for that power reservation to be able to guarantee us when we need it, they will be available for us. So that way they can hold their infrastructure. So if they get more customers on their system, and if they have to upsize their infrastructure, we will still be allocated the demand load that we require. So for the cost summary for the use of 1 week for 24 hours, you have the revised Aggreko contract is $414,000. You have the option 2, the OEC, is a $414,000. So they're similar in nature, but there's an additional $100,000 that we'd have to pay for OEC to be able to get that infrastructure in place. With the current Aggreko contract, if we ever needed it, it's going to cost $900,000 to be able to activate this. And again, these prices are compared if we were going to have a 1 week continuous operation for 24 hours. So the recommendations that we receive is to be able to revise the Aggreko pricing contract and adopt it to be able to have that option to be able to have the Aggreko contract on hand with the reduced pricings, and also authorize the general manager to continue those discussions with OEC to see if, to get that infrastructure in place, if that's a possibility to go to, so we would have a tertiary backup power supply if that's needed in the interim. Is there any questions I'd be happy to answer?
Were the majority of the outages of a shorter duration than a longer duration?
Yes, sir. They were. When I went back and looked at it, you did have, there was a few occasions where there were 8 hours shortages, but the outages that we were looking into is, anywhere between 15 to 20 minutes in that neighborhood.
And how does that impact our ability to produce at the plant?
What happens is that's the total power outages.
Right.
Those occasions, those are total power outages, so no pumping, no treatment, no nothing. And what we have is the actual booster stations in the system. If they're still online, if they're not affected by it, they're still pumping water. But everything from the southeast into the south part of town, they automatically start losing pressure because of the location of the treatment plant.
And once the power comes back on, how long till we're back to normal operations?
Well, usually it depends on how long it is, because they have to be able to make sure they get all the air out of the system.
Right.
There's some places in the city where the booster stations where the air in the system airlocks the pumps, and we have to go out and troubleshoot those and everything to be able to get it. So anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour is when we continuously see back in normal operations to be able to do it. It just depends on the time frame that we're out.
And if it were an 8-hour outage, would it be longer to get back up to speed?
It would, because a lot of your chemicals and your doses and your water's still not flowing through the plant, so you have to be able to make sure that you still have the good water quality in the plant to be able to push it out in case you have to drain a basin or something like that.
Okay.
So this contract would be running through June 30th of 17. And with the FEMA dollars that are coming in, what's the anticipated permanent solution, if you will?
So the permanent solution comes online in December of 17. It's installed generators on site, hardened, with a hardened power system through the plant, delivering power throughout the plant. So we're looking at a very short term, what to do to strengthen our reliability for these kinds of storm seasons. And we found two solutions.
Right.
OEC could not be an immediate solution, but it could be an effective one for an additional backup for another year. We think the revised Agreco is a better response time for us and overall going to be the right thing to do to have infrastructure sitting in place.
Right, but either choice is an interim solution until we get the permanent FEMA-funded power supply.
That's correct. We have the perfect solution coming. It just can't appear overnight,
Yeah, okay.
like most things.
Okay. Any other comments? Item 3, or B3, is an amendment to the professional service agreement. That's an action item.
I move we receive the report and approve the amendment.
Second. A motion and a second to approve item 6B3. Any other comments, questions? Voting, please. Amendment's approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
We now have 4 trustees available. I think we can go back to item 5, which is a resolution ratifying the action of the general manager concerning an emergency that occurred some time ago.
Madam Clerk, do we need to rescind our previous action? Or do we need a motion to reconsider?
Well, the chair just ordered it.
Okay.
A motion, yes.
So then I'd make a motion to approve the emergency contract then.
No objection.
All right.
Okay.
So I think the motion is in order.
Okay. So I move to approve the emergency contract.
Second. Have a motion and a second to approve item 5A. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, voting please. It's approved. Thank you. Next item is item 6C, which is a presentation by Black & Veatch on the water supply augmentation and reclaimed water uses.
Please, go ahead.
Marcia, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and trustees. I want to first start off by introducing myself. I'm Kurt Ronnekamp with Black & Veatch. I'm the project manager on this study. I want to introduce a couple of other people that are here. My colleagues, Mr. Gary Hunter. He was our senior process engineer specializing in wastewater and water reuse. And then we also have our project director here with us from Black & Veatch, our vice president. So we would take this opportunity to thank the trust for giving Black & Veatch the opportunity to do this study on your behalf. We know it's a very important project for your community, and we're excited to be a part of it. I also want to take a quick moment to thank Marcia and her staff. They were instrumental in helping us work our way through the process and the evaluations that were done in support of the recommendations that come out of this. So thank you for that. We'll talk briefly about the outline here. We've got about a 10 to 15 minute presentation this afternoon. We're going to start off with a review of your current water supply conditions with Lake Hefner and Canton. We also want to talk about the reclaimed water uses that we looked at as part of the study. From that, we're going to move into a brief discussion about the technical aspects, not only from a water quality perspective and but we also want to talk about the quantity and how augmenting the water supply with highly treated wastewater effluent could be one piece of the puzzle of your raw water supply plan. We want to talk about some of the processes, the advanced treatment processes that we looked at to make sure that any water that's diverted from the wastewater treatment plants to the raw water supply is safe. And finally, we want to look at the potential costs of implementing this program and also a preliminary schedule. The photos that you see here, I think you're very familiar with them. These were taken in 2012 and 2013. They're pictures of Lake Hefner when it was low. We understand that your current situation is much the same with low levels at Lake Hefner. The difference between what we saw in 2012 and 2013 compared to today is the Canton Lake levels weren't probably as low at that point in time as they are today. They've been reduced for a number of years now. So the reclaimed water options that we looked at as part of the overall feasibility study were really threefold. The first one was water supply augmentation, looking at taking wastewater from the various wastewater treatment plants on the north side of town and bringing that over to augment the supplies that are over at the Lake Hefner water treatment plant. I do want to point out that water reuse and use of reclaimed water is not something new for Oklahoma City. You have been doing and practicing this since 1997. In fact, last year, Oklahoma City reused 2.3 billion gallons of reclaimed wastewater for non-potable purposes. That represented about 11% of the entire treated effluent that was discharged to the creeks and rivers. So that leads the state as far as I know. So I think Oklahoma City is to be commended for that. The other areas that we looked at, and these are the areas that you're currently using reclaimed water in, that would be for industrial purposes such as at power generation facilities and also for irrigation. An example of that would be Gaillardia Golf Course. So taking those current demands off of the potable water system and moving them to a non-potable water source. We did look at building a separate system to take reclaimed water to some of the non-potable water users throughout your community. And because of the proximity of those uses to where your treatment plants were located, we determined that that was probably not feasible at this point in time. And we really focused our efforts on looking at different areas or different methods to supplement reclaimed water use in Oklahoma City. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Gary Hunter, our senior engineer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trust, again, I'd like to thank you too personally from Black & Veatch for the opportunity to present today. This has been a very challenging project for us from a process standpoint and a very rewarding project. And we'd like to thank staff for all of their input into the project. I get to kind of visit with you a bit more about the technical aspects. The first we're going to talk about is the quantity of water that would be available as we look through different sources throughout the community. As Kurt mentioned, finding and meeting a key water supply demand is critical for the northern part of the city. This also had to be both economic and viable as a source. We looked at a number of alternatives throughout the area to look for those water sources. And a review of those sources included the source itself, the ability to bring water into the system, the water rights that might be associated with that water. After we looked at all of those, the most viable source of that was the reclaimed water from the wastewater treatment facilities. This, bringing the water into the wastewater treatment, embraces the concepts of the state water plan, the Water for 2020 goal. And if you can look at that in terms of recycling and reuse, it keys in on those two key components of the plan. The other technical aspect that we needed to look at was the whole key of what would be the constituents within the water that we would need to remove to make this a very key water source. The three up here are the pathogens and microbial removal that we would need to achieve, low concentration of constituents. We show the picture here of caffeine. There are just a number of those low concentration constituents that are out there, and the list is growing. And so we wanted a robust treatment process that would be able to remove those constituents. The other issue is salt. As we continue to reclaim and reuse, we end up seeing a buildup of salt, and we wanted to address that particular issue. The other key aspect of this particular project was barriers, and providing multiple barriers within the system to be able to provide this reliable water source. Oftentimes we see those as being environmental in nature through the discharge of effluent into lakes and or rivers or other receiving bodies, and then letting natural attenuation take its course. Throughout the study, we also looked at engineered buffers, mechanical equipment that might be potentially used to provide those additional buffers. And so I'll share a little bit about some of those here. So to be able to address sort of the quality issues, we looked at three different process trains, looking at microfiltration, reverse osmosis, and advanced oxidation. I will say this is the traditional train that if you look at reuse facilities in Arizona and California, this is the path that they tend to take. It addresses all three of the key components that we were looking at in terms of water quality, in terms of pathogens, in terms of low concentration constituents and salt. And so that was kind of one we looked at. Recently, through research and literature and other studies going on, other parts in terms of reuse, two other alternatives have come forward in terms of the potential for being able to be applied here in Oklahoma City. One of them is ozonation, biologically activated filtration, and high-level UV. This is very similar, actually, to the treatment process that is at the Lake Hefner Water Treatment Production Facility today. Part of that is looking at, so that takes care of that particular ozonation, biological active filtration, high level, takes care of the low concentration constituents and the pathogens, and then we're left with salt. One of the things that the study looked at is how salt would be recycled and what levels we'd have to deal with. Throughout the study, within that, we're still doing some ongoing study relative to that and looking at those particular constituents and looking at salt and how it would be built up, but looking at it as a viable. The other alternative that came out of this was a newer advanced oxidation chlorination UV system, where essentially we would have chlorine probes in a high-level UV system to essentially, again, address low-level constituents and pathogens. So it looks like it's a real opportunity. To give you some rough feel for actual costs that were determined as part of the study, the microfiltration, reverse osmosis, advanced oxidation would be about $18 a gallon, and the ozone biological active filtration, high-level UV, as well as the advanced oxidation chlorination would cost in the range of about $8 a gallon. Moving forward in terms of availability, our first project that we sort of identified throughout the study would take reclaimed water from the Deer Creek Wastewater Treatment Facility to Lake Hefner. This would provide around 13,000 acre-feet of water currently in 2015 to supplement the lake. Forward-looking in 2060, there would be about 20,000 acre-feet of water. We would look at providing advanced wastewater treatment facilities with ozone, biological active filtration, and high-level UV. A pump station pipeline would be constructed to convey the water from the Deer Creek facility to Lake Hefner. Chlorine would be added to that pipeline, and then dechlorination facilities or aeration at Lake Hefner. I want to kind of drill in and look at this particular picture. This is actual water from a facility in Melbourne, Australia that implemented ozone bath in UV, and you can see how clear that water is in terms of comparing it to tap water. So it essentially offers us a comparison of what we would be looking at as we move forward into the future.
So Gary, you're basically setting up a small Hefner at Deer Creek because we've got ozonization, we got biological active filters, we don't do ultraviolet, but we do chlorination on that, so it's just a different type of disinfection.
Correct.
So you're basically setting up a small Hefner plant on the back end of Deer Creek, and then you pump it into the lake.
That would be a correct statement, Mr. Couch. Okay. That's what we would be doing at this point, and that would be to address these particular constituents, and we would have to look at salt in the future as well. This shows the outline of the pipeline. This would be a 42 to 40-inch pipeline from Deer Creek down to and around to the confluence of Hefner Canal into Lake Hefner. We chose this location mainly to allow the amount or high level of mixing, as much mixing as we could. So Lake Hefner in this particular case would become the environmental buffer. And it's about a 11-mile pipeline essentially moving forward. Project 2 would look at tying in the Chisholm Creek to Deer Creek. That would provide us about 9,000 acre-feet today and about 12,000 acre-feet in 2060. If you add up the total of the 20,000 acre-feet or 20,000 and 12,000 acre-feet of water in 2060, that essentially provides the difference which we were looking at, that is the deficit between Lake Hefner today is about 20 to 30,000 acre-feet of water a year. So essentially we believe that through this we can provide a fair amount of the deficit that we could be looking at in the Lake Hefner watershed currently. This particular project would expand the Deer Creek wastewater treatment facility, expansion of pump station, and expansion of dechlorination facilities, and mirror essentially what was going on at the Deer Creek facility. This would be a 4-mile line from the Chisholm Creek plant to the Deer Creek plant, and it's about 36-inch in diameter. Going into the future, if water levels continue to drop, the option is available to bring water from the North Canadian wastewater treatment facility across town to the Lake Hefner. This would require a very large pipeline, 72-inch in diameter and about 20 miles long. So while the water is available, we would recognize very quickly that would be a very expensive pipeline to move that water. To offset those costs, we looked at what is known as scalping plants. These are small reclaimed water plants, usually membrane in nature, membrane bioreactors, so we have membranes in the biology system to essentially decrease the footprint of the facility. They're generally located near high water users, so they're strategically located to allow that reclaimed water to be used coming off the facility. As we looked at that, moving forward with scalping facilities, it would be a function of customer demand as well as outside economic development. Just to give you some feel, the picture in the lower left hand is actually a scalping facility located in the Atlanta area providing water to golf courses, and the one on the bottom right is actually located in the Phoenix area with an MBR facility. So a lot of water restricted areas are looking at these MBR and these scalping plants to provide water to industrial customers without essentially the construction of very large conveyance facilities. So just to give you a feel of what those projects, and this is the construction cost, to take the water from the Deer Creek the new wastewater, advanced wastewater treatment facility, the pump station pipeline would be approximately $109 million in terms of construction. There is a typo in your minutes. The project construction of facilities going from the Chisholm Creek to the Deer Creek would be approximately $69 million. I believe it's somewhere in the $89 million or so in the note, agenda that came out. So there is a typo there, if you could make note of that. So our recommendations going forward, we believe in terms of the cost, the ability to move ahead with the Deer Creek, Chisholm Creek, reclaimed water, moving it over to the Hefner Lake would be appropriate, and one that we would recommend to the trust to consider. Part of that particular study would be to be able to work closely with ODEQ. Many of those folks are here today. They are working very hard in terms of the establishment of water reuse, both in terms of indirect as well as direct potable reuse regulations to cover what we are looking at in terms of moving forward with Lake Hefner at this point in time. So we would work very closely with ODEQ as things move forward. Because a number of these technologies that we are looking at are sort of, I won't say new, but not very well applied around the world, we would recommend conducting a demonstration study to verify and validate what has been done other places and move forward with that. We'd also recommend visiting other communities. There are a number of communities actually in Texas that have been down this path that we could probably gain a lot of information from. Part of this would be to expand our monitoring program. There's a lot of constituents that we would need to know more about, salt being sort of the pinnacle of that, and essentially looking not only at the receiving streams but also the wastewater treatment facilities in terms of monitoring and developing a public outreach program that would convey the message of reuse to our constituents here within the Oklahoma City Water Utility Trust. This kind of outlines the schedule, the demonstration. There is a study that would need to be done to allow us to connect the effluent from the treatment facilities. We call it a TMDLC. That would occur during the first couple of years. The visiting, additional monitoring over the next 5 years, public outreach over the next 5 years, and then at the end of the first year of the demonstration study, then we would move into projects that would outline in terms of design and construction of facilities to move water from the Deer Creek facility to the Lake Hefner, and then outways then in terms of year 5 moving water from the Chisholm Creek to Deer Creek. Long term, of course, is the ability to bring the water from North Canadian over if needed. So in summary, it is very viable. It looks very promising. The ability to augment water to Lake Hefner with water from the wastewater treatment facilities. It's a very valuable resource that we can take advantage of, as well as position ourselves for other opportunities as we move forward in terms of direct and potable indirect potable reuse. It allows us to address our current issues relative to water deficits in the reservoir, as well as address future water supply issues. And through the treatment technologies and the approaches, we ensure the ability to protect the public health and public environmental health as we move forward. And with that, I would be glad to address any questions.
Anyone have any questions? Go back over the timeline again for me when water will actually be put into Hefner.
Okay. What we would anticipate, Mr. Chairman, is the demonstration work, and so there's a lot of upfront work that we would need to do during the next 2 years. We would anticipate that construction of facilities would occur. So if you're looking at this, the initial pre-design work would start in year 2, probably design in year 3, and then construction in year 4. So we would probably not be delivering water to Lake Hefner until year 5 out, from 5 years from now, approximately. So we have a lot of basis in terms of learning information as well as, understanding how ODEQ and the reuse regulations would unfold. So probably about 5 years plus or minus before we would see water, I think, being conveyed at that point in time.
Yes. Yes, what we're working toward is moving on to some next steps. We're not, we need, how to put this, so we need to begin taking samples, and potentially we'll have to discuss that, we have to report, we may do some pilot work to figure out what how much of what we can remove effectively.
Okay. And so today, if we receive the report and authorize the amendments, you'll go negotiate all those terms and then come back and tell us, here's the scope of what we're going to do next?
That's correct. Okay. We have, as we've said multiple times on the topic, as Gary's visited with us before, we have science work to do.
Right.
We're excited. I have great faith in Gary's ability. I know him to be a national expert in this area. And have worked with him in volunteer work and other things, along with DEQ staff members. So we know he knows what he's talking about. We want to be as cautious as we humanly can, and I think he's okay with that.
Sure.
Thank you, Marcia.
In that case, I would move we receive the report and authorize negotiation.
Second. Motion and a second to receive the report and to authorize the amendment to the engineering contract. Are there further questions? I have one further comment. When I see the public outreach education portion of it is supposed to start fairly immediately, or when we get this done. Before that starts, I'd like to have some kind of presentation back here before you kick it off, so those of us that might be asked questions about it after it gets started would be better prepared to answer anything.
We'd be glad to, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely.
But we have a motion and a second to approve the amendment. Voting, please. It's approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We do not need executive session, I understand. Is that right?
That's correct.
The motion and a second to strike. Voting, please. Stricken. Item from trustees. Any comments? Hearing none. General Manager's report.
Mr. Chairman, we have simply the monthly update. We're at 3/4 of the fiscal year. I am thrilled to tell you that when this report was finished at the end of March, we had 58% of our lakes water was accessible and total water accessible, and now we have 68.5%. So we've made a typical spring run and are expecting more rain later this week, and just really pleased. Lake Atoka is within 2 feet of full. Mickey Creek is full. Canton Lake is up about 1.5 feet over the last week. Lake Hefner, unfortunately, is still 12 feet down. Lake Oberholzer are still about 6 feet down. But good progress, typical of spring. Palm Beach is a little bit lower than normal, but we produced about the same volume of water, but took in about 3% less through the water treatment plants. That says they've made some efficiency improvements in how we treated water through the winter months. The total volume of wastewater is down still about a small percentage of the total. And finally, meter sales are off this fiscal year about 10% of last year, which was also, again, double the previous year. So right in line with a good number of new customers, I think.
Good.
What did you say the increase has been at Canton?
It's about 1.5 feet over the last 3 weeks.
Since this report?
Oh, pardon me.
This report always fascinates me that Canton is below what it was a year ago. I mean, we haven't taken any water now in over a year, and it's less than it was.
I'm sorry, it is 1.25 feet from what it was at the end of March. It's 1.5 feet since the middle of March, though.
Okay.
So, going in the right direction.
Any other comments? Are there citizens to be heard? Hearing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.